My family betrayed me in court, and I lost custody of my son. Now my ex-wife has betrayed them too, and they need my help. I secretly recorded them confessing everything. Hi, this might be a bit long because there are a lot of things I have to mention to make sense of everything. I'm 33 years old and got divorced a few months ago, but the whole thing had been brewing for almost a year. I met my ex-husband James through a friend when I was 25. After 2 years of dating, we decided to move in together and get married. His family is quite conservative and traditional, and disapproved of the cohabitation, so we had to get married if we wanted to stay together. I really like James, so I didn't have a problem marrying him. My parents also agreed with the decision, so we got married less than a year after moving in together. We were overjoyed to find out that I was pregnant, and we felt like our family was really starting to come together. Everything seemed to be going right, but unfortunately, when I announced the pregnancy, my in-laws started pressuring me to quit my job and focus on being a mother. My job did not have generous maternity leave provisions, and I had only been employed for a short time, so my maternity leave would be particularly short, which made me feel doubly pressured. At that time, I weighed the pros and cons and decided to quit my job. This was not a decision I made alone. Everyone was involved. James and his parents kept telling me that it was the best decision in the long run and that I had to do it. James seemed so sure of everything, saying that he would take care of the family, that I didn't have to worry about money, that he would earn enough to come home, and that I only had to think about raising the child. My parents and brother also thought that I should quit my job and stay at home, because my mother had done the same, and although she had the option to go back to work, she chose not to because it was her priority. The pressure from both sides of the family was so great that I decided to quit my job. I was 3 months pregnant at the time, and everything was going well, and I had complete faith that my husband would not let me down, which is why I gave up my flourishing career to become a full-time mom. However, shortly after my son was born, I noticed that James was acting a little strange during the last few months of my pregnancy. I can't describe it exactly, but there just seemed to be something wrong with his energy and everything. He seemed happy when my son was born, and I thought everything would go back to normal, but it got worse. He became very irritable with me whenever I tried to talk to him. The only time he seemed happy and content was when he was playing with my son. Apart from that, he always found it boring to be at home with me, so he often worked long hours, and even on weekends he always found excuses not to spend time with me. I really couldn't understand what was wrong, but I did my best to keep our marriage together because unlike him, I loved him and I didn't want to give up our marriage. This trend continued for about 2 years until my son was born. He would stay at work longer than necessary, and even when he was at home, he wasn't really with me. I couldn't complain because every time I tried to talk to him about it, he would just tell me that he was really tired from work and that it wasn't easy for him to be the sole breadwinner in the family. This really made me feel bad because I wasn't incapable of supporting the family, but I had to rely on him because he had promised me that he would make it easier for me. I even asked him if he wanted me to go back to work so that we could share all the expenses and he wouldn't have to be under so much pressure, but he said it would be an insult to him and an insult to his abilities. Besides, my in-laws would never agree to it, and if I went back to work, we would have a hard time getting along with them. So I continued to stay at home and raise our son, which was almost the only thing that brought me joy because James had changed. He was no longer the man I married. About a year ago, I found out that James had actually been having an affair with one of his colleagues. To be honest, I found it hard to discover because I had suspected it for a long time and even peeked at his phone and laptop a few times when he was asleep, but found nothing. I knew all his passwords because he wrote them in a note, but even that didn't help. He had very little to hide, and I even felt like a fool for doubting him. I even went through his things, looking for a disposable phone or something, but I found nothing. For a while, I even began to believe that maybe I was being paranoid and insecure, but then Lady Luck smiled on me and I saw evidence of his infidelity with my own eyes. About a year ago, James and I threw a big birthday party for our son, and he invited the other woman, a single mother with a son about the same age as my son. and told me she was a very close friend of his, so I didn't think it was necessary at all. After my son had cut the birthday cake, I decided to go upstairs to the bedroom because I wanted to change into more comfortable clothes for the party, but when I walked into the bedroom, I realized that my husband had already gone in, and his colleague was sitting in his lap, and they were making out like crazy. When I walked in on them, it took me a few minutes to process what I had witnessed. First, the fact that they entered my bedroom was the worst part. Second, they didn't even separate when they heard the door open, so I had to walk in front of them to make them realize I was there. I'm sure they thought it would be funny to make out in my bedroom just for a thrill, but they probably didn't expect me to completely lose it. I'm not proud of it, but knowing that what I suspected for so long was actually true broke me inside. I grabbed my colleague by the hair and started dragging her out of the room. I was unstoppable. As far as I know, James was much stronger than me, but he couldn't stop me. I don't even remember most of it because I think I fainted from the anger. I dragged her downstairs, James right behind me, and pushed her into the middle of the room in front of everyone. I don't remember what I said, but apparently I gave her a piece of my mind and told everyone what she and James had been doing in my bedroom. I didn't even care that my son was there, along with his group of friends. Looking back, it was very embarrassing and inappropriate, but at the time I wasn't aware of that at all. I just screamed, and my parents, brother, and in-laws were there. I think in the end it was my father who calmed me down and took me back to my room. When I got back to my room, I completely broke down and started crying. I sobbed uncontrollably, but instead of staying to comfort me, my father locked me in my room and left. I should have known right away that my parents didn't care about me. I always knew they cared more about appearances than reality, but this was crazy. For the next few hours, no one came to check on me, and even though I calmed down a lot, I had no idea what was going on outside. I didn't even have my phone, so I couldn't ask anyone. It wasn't until after midnight that my brother, who didn't even ask how I was doing, came to check on me. They probably would have let me stay in my room longer if I hadn't banged on the door like a madman when I came out. I asked my brother what happened after I was locked in my room, and he told me that almost everyone had left after my breakdown. He also said that James and his parents and my son had left, and that at that time there were only my parents and him in the room. He told me to leave the room so that we could discuss what to do now, but all my family wanted to discuss was for me to apologize to all the guests for my behavior at the party. Not only that, but I also had to apologize to my in-laws and James for what I had done. They told me that he had a hard time convincing his colleagues not to press charges against me for the physical violence I had committed against her, so now it was my responsibility to talk to him and work things out instead of making a big deal out of it. I was so freaked out that I told them to get out of my house because I would not allow them to stand under my roof and tell me that I had to apologize to my cheating husband. I had a huge fight with my family because they told me that I was responsible for making things right and giving this marriage a second chance, or they would disown me, so I told them to go ahead because I no longer cared what people thought of me. I was going to file for divorce and get out of this mess, and I didn't need anyone's permission, so I contacted a lawyer the next day and filed for divorce within a week of the incident. James received the divorce papers very quickly, and he was actually disappointed and shocked, and ran home on the day he got the divorce papers to demand an explanation. I told him that I would never forgive him for insulting me like that. We had a big fight, and I said a lot of nasty things and called him a lot of nasty names. In the end, he promised me that I would never see my son again, but I didn't think he would actually keep his word. Then the legal proceedings began. The divorce proceedings were much simpler than the custody proceedings because we had hardly any joint assets to speak of. The house was mine, that was never in doubt, because I had bought it with my own money. Everything else had to be sold, and the costs shared equally between us. We only had to wait 6 months for the divorce to be finalized. The only thing we couldn't agree on was alimony, because I had to start from scratch, because he forced me to quit my job and I didn't have enough money of my own. He thought I shouldn't get any at all, but of course that was out of the question, because he had told me he would help me and make sure I never had to work. Luckily, I had several documents to prove this, otherwise I probably wouldn't have gotten any at all. The The divorce process was emotionally easier for me because in my mind I had already cut ties with James, but the custody battle was very frustrating because unfortunately my parents and brother decided to stab me in the back for the money. My ex and his lawyer were horrible people, and they started by claiming that I was a very careless and mentally unstable mother, which proved that I was not capable of raising my son alone, so James and his parents should now have full custody. I think my parents and brother must have been bought off by my ex-husband's in-laws, because they are very wealthy and I can't think of any other explanation for why they would betray me. In fact, I'm pretty sure they were just after their money in the first place. James accuses me of being incapable of raising our son and is demanding full custody because apparently I'm a functional alcoholic with serious anger issues. They've made up several incidents where I've lost my temper and put our son at risk of injury. None of it happened, of course, but they needed to do something to make me look like the bad guy. I thought at least some people would be on my side, but my friends decided to take his side, which I think was largely because of my breakdown at my son's birthday party. But the worst betrayal of all was that my parents and brother also testified against me in court, claiming that I needed rehab and serious intensive therapy before I was allowed to see my son again, as I was obviously not in a sound mental state, which may have contributed to James cheating me, as he was tired of dealing with me. Despite a good defense by my lawyer, I unfortunately lost custody of my son. My lawyer and I did our best to gather the scraps of evidence that proved I was a good mother, but it was all for naught in the end. The verdict was announced a few months ago, and that was the last time I saw my son in person. I did get supervised visitation rights, but James wouldn't let me see him anyway, so it was kind of pointless. He's 4 now, but he hardly ever sees me, and I'm always afraid that he'll grow up and forget me. From what I understand, some of my relatives who are still on my side say that my family can still see him because they often post pictures of me and my son. James and my son still live with my in-laws, and basically everyone gets to see him except me. I can't imagine anything more heartbreaking. I have been living only on the memories of my son and I, believing that at least he is being taken care of by James, because I don't think I can give him a good life on my salary, as I am just starting out. I found a job with a friend's company, but it is a startup company and the income is not high at the moment, so my salary does not meet the expectations of a woman in her 30s, and even the other employees are in their early 20s. Just to gain experience so that they can find better opportunities in the future. I do get alimony every month, but it really isn't enough because I still need to maintain, and I can't cut back on expenses exactly like a single person, but that's all I have right now because there are huge gaps in my resume. I had thought that once I cleaned up my ACT, I would apply for joint custody again, and maybe then I would have a chance. But the chance really fell on me a few weeks ago, when my parents contacted me after not speaking for a few months, asking for my help. They needed help. They needed me to help them, because James was unexpectedly not the good man they thought he was. My brother sent me an email saying I needed to come to their house as soon as possible because they had discovered something big that they wanted me to know because they were tired of hiding it from me and wanted to be a part of my life again. I tried to ignore the email that day, but I couldn't stop thinking that maybe this could help me with my son. I went to their house that night. I expected them to be living like kings because they sold me out for money, but in reality they were worse off than before. However, my son was happy to see me, which made my visit to my family that day all the more worthwhile. As soon as I entered the house, they began to beg my forgiveness, as they were clearly aware that they had messed up and there was no going back, but they still wanted me to forgive them after the divorce. They found my ex-husband and James and asked them for the money they had promised. James told my family that it would not happen again, obviously just hinting that they would be handsomely compensated if they turned against me and testified in their favor, but there was no written evidence. If my family tried to go back to me with this, then they would make sure they never saw my son again. For the sake of my son, they decided to keep quiet. Although they were not paid the promised compensation, the situation got even worse because they were used, not only manipulated into testifying against me, but also used as a free nanny. James would drop our son off at my parents' house every day, and they had to take care of him, sacrificing their own time, which was very inconvenient, because even my father and my brother had work to do. And my mother could not take on all the housework and care for her grandson alone because she was old. So my father or my brother had to work from home every day, which was really hard for them, which is why they contacted me to finally put an end to it. Apparently, they wanted to make a deal with me and said that if I gave them the money my ex-father-in-law had promised them, they would support me in court this time and make sure I got custody of my son. I was going to make that offer too, but to be honest, it's not surprising that they did this. My family has always been materialistic, and now even more so, because my father's business failed and they went back to working for other people. Obviously, they need money now more than ever, because my father wants to retire, but he simply doesn't have enough money because he invested all of it in the business, which failed. They said they could make up stories about how they were forced and coerced to testify against me, so they wouldn't be accused of perjury under oath, but they didn't know that I actually no longer needed help. I had been recording everything they said from the moment I walked in the door because I knew something was wrong and I didn't want to take any chances, so I recorded everything, but I also had my family send me screenshots to prove that they had lied too. Then I told them that I would help them, and I left. I had already seen my son, and I had enough evidence to apply for custody again, so that's what I did the next day with my lawyer, and this time I was prepared. The custody case is still ongoing, but one thing is for sure, I will be able to prove that none of the things James accused me of were true and that my family has been lying. I have already played the recording, and it has changed my perspective dramatically. James and his lawyer are desperately looking for evidence that will help their case, while I am embracing and enjoying the show, because this is exactly what they did to me last time, and now it is my turn to get my revenge. It is the best revenge, and I couldn't be happier. The only thing that wasn't so great was their claim that I had used them in the same way as James, and that I had no right to record them without their consent and use it against them. But as far as I was concerned, that was completely irrelevant and acceptable in court, so I didn't understand what they were referring to until they told me that I had betrayed their trust by recording their conversations. That was a bold statement from people who had betrayed my trust in the first place by siding with my ex-husband in my custody case. They felt that what I did was wrong because what they did was out of necessity. They needed the money, but I didn't need to deceive them and put them at risk of perjury. Testify, so I didn't have to do it behind their backs. They kept texting me nonstop, and it became harder and harder for me to ignore. I did this because I betrayed my family and put them at risk of being accused of perjury. Update 1. Hello everyone, the custody case is still ongoing, and James and his lawyer are doing their best to prove that they have been telling the truth the whole time, because they could face charges, and it is a felony, they could go to jail. But that really isn't something I care about right now, and I should never have worried about them. I don't even know why I would worry about my parents, when they obviously didn't worry about me when it was my turn, so I'm really in luck now. The comment section has shown me that my parents are very self-righteous, but anyway, I have already cut them off and they can go wherever they want. I hope that my son is doing well and is with me. I have waited long enough, and I will not let my family and their egoistic sacrifices hurt me. If they betray me for money, I don't think I need to show any loyalty to them. I'm done now, the update is over, and the good news is that I finally got custody of my son. I don't think I've ever been happier in my life. The other good news is that my in-laws, James and my family, have been charged with perjury, and yes, they could go to jail for it. I bet they're regretting it now, but I don't care because I got what I wanted. I got my son, and that's all I wanted. I know James is still fighting to avoid going to prison, but I don't think it's going to work. I've already applied for a restraining order against them because I've received some very threatening text messages, and I'm 100% sure they're from them because no one else would want to hurt me. The past few weeks have been very hectic and stressful, but I've learned to slow down now. I desperately want to spend more time with my son, so I've decided to cut back on my working hours. I've also been thinking about selling the house and moving to a smaller apartment so I can save more money. I still have a lot of work to do, and rebuilding my relationship with my son is not easy, because although he's happy to be with me, he still asks about his father and his grandparents, and I don't know what to tell him. He has told me a few things about them, such as the fact that he spent most of his time with his grandparents, and that his father and my in-laws only visited him occasionally. Whenever I ask him how his grandparents are doing, he makes a face and says that they are not doing well because everyone is constantly fighting. I can fully understand that. It sounds like they really gave him a hard time just because they didn't want to take responsibility. I can't imagine why they treated a child like that, but I can understand people who can make a little boy feel inferior about himself. But I don't have to worry anymore, because now he's with me. Update 3. Hello everyone. I can't believe it's been almost 5 years. It feels a bit surreal. Life is very different now. 5 years is a really long time. So much has changed. First and foremost, my son has grown up, and we have a great relationship now. After countless therapy sessions, my son and I have finally become the kind of mother-son relationship we were meant to be. He is growing up to be a wonderful person, and I'm sure he won't be like his father, because I know this in my heart. He is now 9 years old and is already the perfect gentleman. I raised him alone, with full custody, because James gave up custody after being released from prison and moved to Europe. I can't say I was surprised when he eloped with his coworker. He had been cheating on me the whole time, and now they are married. I think he just replaced his biological son with another child. Another child? That's terrible, but that's just the kind of person he is. As for my parents and brother, they were released 6 months early for good behavior. We have not kept in touch, and they have not tried to contact me since their release, which I am grateful for, because I don't think I have anything to say to them anyway. I have no news of my in-laws, and it's best that way. I haven't heard from them or received news from them for many years. I feel that I am doing well now with a stable job and income from my studies. Thanks to God's grace, I am still working in the company that I started with a friend, and it has developed very well. Life has been good for me and my son, and that has exceeded my expectations. I am truly grateful for everything.